we have also pleasure in welcoming Dr. Gregory Bergland, who is the CEO of the planet Earth and belongs to USA and lives in France. He will be welcomed by Dr. Tanmay Rudra from Kolkata. Pleasure in requesting Dr. Poonam Verma, the learned principal of the College of Asian Studies, to come and release this book, besides dedicating this book to the world citizenry. You also brought this. First copy.
Thank you.
First copy.
Congratulations.
We have
very appropriate.
Thank you. We have published more than 500 books on different aspects of management and administration. We would like to give you the copy of those books some other day, and we thought this topic is very important, so the credit goes to her for releasing this book.
The credit goes to the authors.
Thank you.
And in fact, the occasion is very appropriate.
So the motivation came from Dr. Gregory Bergland when during the World Spiritual Parliament, which we had a session at India International Center a few months back, he was talking of this subject, and I got motivated from him based on his experiences which he had, say, about
100 years ago.
About 40 years ago, when he was a young boy and he was working for the US Air Force in United States of America. Friends, we have great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Markandey, the Learning Chancellor of the Indira Gandhi Technological and Medical Sciences University of Arunachal Pradesh, as also the Senior Advisor of United Nations in the Habitat Division. He has spent about 29 years with the UN, and now he is in Delhi. So we welcome him, please. The wonderful experience Dr. Gregory Bergland had about more than 40 years back when he was working for US Air Force, and while working there, the government of US did not approve his ideas of endorsing a policy of disarmament, and the US government thought of disowning him by declaring him insane. And during that period, he had many types of experiences, and based on that he authored a book later on under the name of Disarming Madness, Schizo Tango, and that was published in French language. Once it came to publishing in English language, many publishers refused to do it. It was about 25 years back, the same day. Today is my birthday, by the way, and again on 13th March 1995, he came to Delhi and met me and tried to know whether I can invite him to attend the program. That time, everybody used to see Hindu and Times of India in today's engagements, we had mentioned that in today's engagement, the important is my program here. So the same is the hall. He wanted to know whether he can come. He came here, and since then we became thick friends. And then he said that people are not accepting his publication in English language because of the fear that perhaps they will be blacklisted. I took the courage of printing it, publishing it, and distributing it all over the world. So many more editions have come in India and the rest of the world. So that is our experience with him. And today, the book which has been released, Related to Spiritual Emergency and Crisis, is dedicated to the World Centenary. It's wonderful reading. And those of you interested in having a copy of the book can have the e-copy. You can leave your email address, and tomorrow or day after we will email to you, because this is easier to go through the e-copy than the hard copy, because it becomes very expensive to print. And after printing, we do not go towards a paperless society. It is very unlikely that we would be able to protect our environment, because every year if we save one page through the students, we can save about felling of, cutting of more than 1 million trees. अगर एक पेज बचा लिया जाए तो 10 लाख पौधों को बचाया जा सकता है. So with these words, we are pleased to request Dr. Gregory Bergland to introduce the subject by presenting the keynote address.
Are we mic'd on? No. Nice to see everybody here. I feel all of you are distinguished guests, and we welcome you. Happy birthday to Dr. Trivedi. It's good to see many friends and to also meet many people for the first time. Stillness is most difficult, for there we discover, in facing the real, nothing. Stillness is most difficult, for there we discover, in facing the real, nothing. That is a fragment from the book published by Dr. Trivedi, published in France and Greece, otherwise nowhere else. I gave that book to a gentleman in the dining hall here during one of Dr. Trivedi's functions at lunchtime. That gentleman was the ex-chief statistician of India. He had sons, 3 sons living in America, in the city where I was then living, in Seattle, Washington. And I told him I had authored some books, and he said, I want to see that book. I gave him the book. He said, can I take it? He called me a few days later and said, meet me for lunch. He opened the book to stillness is most difficult, for there we discover, in facing the real, nothing. He asked me, did you write that? I said, yes. He said, well then, in the eyes of a Hindu, you have known God. Have I? We speak of religion, we speak of deities, we speak of spirituality. Well, we've just lived through a very serious crisis in South Asia. It might still be going on. What part of spirituality are nuclear weapons? And I'd like an answer, now or later. Okay. I'll ask the question again. What part of spirituality are nuclear weapons? Anybody? My answer is the nothing part the void, the critical absence. Nothing. We would crash our way into the void in nuclear blasts. That is my thinking, my perspective, and that's probably why they locked me up into a psychiatric ward for 6 months and forced me to take medication because, as a young officer, I was quite simply looking around me and saying, well, these nuclear weapons targeting the Soviet Union on quick reaction alert, 15-minute launch times. Have we all gone mad? Are we insane? How do you feel as Indians to have Pakistanis targeting you with their nuclear weapons? Is that an acceptable way to live on this earth? I don't believe it is. And I don't believe it's acceptable for you to target Pakistanis, for the Americans to target anybody, anywhere in the world. And the reason it's happening is because our meanings are wrong. We live under wrong meanings. Why do I say this? Do I know this? Or am I faking it? Am I pretending to know something? I am making a truth claim. I am making a claim to truth. It's a big move. Anybody here who's going to live an intellectual life and make efforts to understand this world that we live in, when you make a claim such as that, our meanings are wrong, you better be ready to explain yourself. Well, I say, we fail to occupy the earth as spiritual beings. Thus, nuclear weapons light our pathway to the void. We refuse to know the void as we refuse our madness. And when I was on nuclear weapon alert, observing the madness that was our targeting the Soviet Union, and observing 3 squadrons of fighter pilots mobilizing to go to war in Vietnam, each pilot going to war would make 100 flying missions and drop bombs on Vietnamese 100 times. And when I saw the enthusiasm for doing that, the fervor, the absolute excitement about going to a war zone, I said, we've lost it. We're a case. We are crazy. And the U.S. government told me, no, we're not crazy. You're crazy. You're mad. In fact, not just mad. They said, after several months of hospitalization, they said I was a paranoid schizophrenic. Everybody knows what that is, of course, right? So, I got the book published in France, and then after 17 years after the French edition, Dr. Trivedi published the book. Okay, the book was based on a lived experience, and when I lived the experience, the term spiritual emergency didn't exist for me. For how many of you today is spiritual emergency a new concept? 1, 2, anybody else? The rest of you know what spiritual emergency means? Well, then why don't you just raise your hand? Who knows what spiritual emergency means? Anybody? You know. And you could tell everybody.
Yeah, definitely I will.
Okay, you want to do it now or
I
later?
will explain how we can reinvent spirituality.
Okay, let me finish my talk, and then Dr. Trivedi will give you allocate you some time. Okay, so nobody else knows except for Manoj, Srivastava, and me. Okay, we're the spiritual emergency specialists. Okay, well, it's also termed a moral crisis, and I thought, in my experience, I was in a moral crisis. You know, I could not longer. What happened? I went to America. I was based in England, out in the East Anglia. We had American Air Force bases there in the This is in the 1960s. 1963, I started, and our aircraft could reach Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia on the Baltic Sea coast, and that's where the targets were. Nuclear weapons we're talking about here. Could fire them in 15 minutes, and my job was to give the authorization to go to target. Then I went to the United States for my sister's wedding, and my best friend from University of Oregon had communicated with me in writing over the period I was in England, but suddenly the letters dried up, no more letters. And I got to my home place, I called his family, and they said, he's in the hospital. They said, come immediately. And I went, and he was in a coma. And he had been operated on for cancer of the brain. And his parents were devastated. And they said, they called me Bergie. Bergie, you have to wake him up. You have to get him out of the coma. So I tried and tried, talking, and then they said, you have to yell. And when I yelled at him, his eyes flickered. And that's where I got the idea that a human being should not have the right to close another person's eyes. We should open people's eyes, if we can. And then I got back to England. I called his family, and they said, he's gone. And I fell. I fell into a moral crisis. Because learning that my best friend is dead, I had to go to duty. And my duty was to launch nuclear weapons and participate in the killing of millions of people. And I can't stand the death of my best friend. So I got on my knees and I prayed. And I prayed to God. And then I realized there was no God to pray to. And that is a crisis situation. And how would you know in such a situation that what I'm going through is leading to something spiritual? When does the spiritual dimension come into play? No, I had an option. I could quite simply resign my functions on nuclear weapon duty, but I had another idea. Well, I go to nuclear weapon duty, and we have 8 aircraft with 8 B-61 bombs, bigger bombs than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And while I'm on duty, if I don't give the order to leave the area to target, they don't go. So I personally, single-handedly disarmed 8 nuclear weapons. Very few people can say that in the world. Very few people would dare say that, because it's almost like illegal. But I just saw in the Washington Post this week something about launching nuclear weapons. If you're an officer and you're involved in the launch of nuclear weapons, and they give you the order to do it, do you have to do it? Ah, do you have to do it? Do you have to kill people when they say kill? Do you have to follow orders? Well, what if the president is insane and the president has given an order to launch nuclear weapons? What if the president is insane? You know who I'm talking about? Our president in the United States is considered by many psychiatrists to be a madman, to be insane. So, do you obey orders from a madman? So how do we get out of this dilemma? I said, if I'm in a system which is insane, and I'm functioning correctly, and I'm doing my duty, and everything's fine, does that not imply that I'm insane too? I'm an insane person in an insane system. And you know, you might think you're functioning quite well and normally, but let's suppose that the general environment is mad. But you're doing fine, because you're just as mad as everybody else. So I said, well, I have to get to the bottom of this. And the bottom of it is me. It's my person. How did I, as a person, become that particular officer with that responsibility? So I plunged. I fell. I fell off the planet Earth. I fell backwards, literally, into the void. I'm not going to go into more detail. Some of you are going to sleep already. No, actually you're not. There's only one film. Okay, so I've written a book called Disarming Madness. If you're really interested in the subject, read the book. And if we want to organize a conference on the whole subject, let's do a conference. Dr. Trivedi has brought out a book on spiritual emergency and crisis. The book is jam-packed. It's loaded with information. It's a rich read. It should be mandatory reading for all the government leaders, especially in my government. Okay, so how would you know? I've described the situation that I experienced, that I lived. By the way, when I fell out, it was at a time I was urinating blood. It's called hematuria. And I had to go to a hospital for examination. And when I got to the hospital, I went to the administration. I said, give me the form to resign my functions on nuclear weapon alert. I filled out the form. Then I had been in the hospital for the same condition 2 years prior. And I saw in the hospital register the name of a captain who had been my roommate 2 years prior. And I went to see him. And he said, oh, Greg, how are things going? I said, Captain, not well. I think the Vietnam War is going to be a disaster for everyone. And the nuclear weapons have command and control problems. They want me to be a supervisor of the weapons system, but we've got too many deficiencies in the weapons system. I will not assume the responsibility. I resigned. He said, woo, you've got big problems. We're going to help you. Well, the help came in the form of forced medication, escorting, air evacuation from England to Germany to the United States with an escort in a C-131, drugged up, got to the hospital in Washington, D.C., rushed to the hospital ward in an ambulance, and put in a closed ward, escorted 2 weeks, because you know, in people in those kinds of situations, what they do? They commit suicide. It's a big risk. Psychiatry can intervene and help a person and put them under care if that person